What if I told you that you can learn 10 times more than everyone else? The only problem is that the way you're learning has been wrong the entire time. Let me show you. Whenever you try to learn, you do it like everyone else. You cram and cram and cram. But when you do this, you are losing about 80% of what you read. You could be learning so much more if you simply just stopped doing this. Luckily though, I have a secret. If you want to learn 10 times more than everyone else, you can make these 4 slight tweaks, and they're guaranteed to turn you into a genius. Just look at this testimony over here. She used it for studying and got a lot out of it. Anyway, here's the first tweak. Now, imagine this. You're at school and the exam is a week away. I'm willing to bet that you do the same thing as everyone else. You study constantly, cramming information. But here's the thing. When exams start, you forget everything anyway. Well, there is a reason this happens. You see, there's this thing called the forgetting curve. Basically, when you learn something, over time, 70% of what you just learned goes away. And then after that, 30% goes away. This happens a lot with people who cram study right before a test. And it's because cramming actually does something to your brain that I'll discuss later in this video. However, there's a way you can get around this. To stop the forgetting curve, you have to interrupt it. But to do this, we're going to change one thing. Basically, I want you to spend at least an hour learning, right? Don't rush it, just learn. But here's where it gets magic. I want you to wait 30 minutes. Just let the mind do its thing. And then once it's passed, you'll do a thing called retrieving. This is where you rehearse everything you just learned. And then wait another 30 minutes and do it again. There's a strong reason this works. There are these things called neural roots. It's where knowledge is often stored. When you retrieve, more of these are created. Which, by the way, fun fact, you know when before I mentioned why cramming is so bad for you? It's because cramming actually does something to your brain that I'll discuss later in this video. Well, this is why it's ineffective. When you retrieve information, because of the neural links, this improves your long-term memory. This is what's known as the testing effect. It's how your brain retains information. However, when you cram study, because you're not giving your brain the time to think, the information becomes short-term, so it disappears. So that's the first tweak, right? But this next one will change how you learn forever. Because let me get you in on a secret. A study was conducted where 2 groups of kids were told to throw beanbags into cans, but look at the second group. They were told to do something unique. Group 2 was told to throw the bags at 2 different cans, and one can was at a different distance. Now guess which group did the best? You would probably guess the first one, right? Well, wrong. The second one actually outperformed them by a landslide. There's a very good reason behind this. It's because of something I call the varied effect. I'll explain why it's called that in a minute, but what made Group 2 so effective was that they were able to master the skill much faster than the other group. And this was because the 2 buckets actually changed how they practiced. So let's get into the varied effect. The reason Group 2 was able to learn the skill faster is because the practice was varied. Now, what does that mean? Well, let's say you're learning how to draw, right? If you draw the same thing over and over again, you're not going to get better. But if you draw one thing and then change it up and draw another, you'll get much better faster. This is because when you change how you practice, this enables your brain to be more engaged, which allows it to retain more. So how do we use this to learn more things? Well, what I'm about to show you can double your learning. So let's say you're reading a textbook. It's very boring. It's fake and gay. As you flip to the next page, you get very, very bored. But what if we make one slight change? Basically, spend 20 to 30 minutes reading one chapter. However, after that, you're going to change how you learn the information. You could do active recall, or you could write it on a piece of paper. Then after that, have a 10-minute break. And then do it again. This actually burns the information faster into your brain, because doing this makes the brain engaged, like I said earlier. This sounds great, right? Well, there is a way you can make this technique even better. You know how I spoke about cramming before? Well, if you cram varied practice, the same thing will happen. You just won't learn as much. However, what if we make this one change? So you know how I spoke about short-term memory and long-term memory? Well, we want everything to be long-term, right? Well, what if we do this? We just space out the varied practice sessions, right? So we just merge these 2 methods together. When you space out your varied practice sessions, doing this gives your brain time to retain everything, making what you learned a long-term memory. So that was spaced practice and varied practice. However, now it's time to change things up. Why? Because we have a massive problem. You see, we can space things out and change our practice, but we'll still learn very little. Why? Well, let me set the scene. Let's say you're reading a textbook. Again, you sat in a chair in the study room. You open this massive book and you start reading. But as you try to read, your mind starts to wander around. Now, by the time you're done reading, how much did you actually retain? Nothing. you can't remember a single thing. Comment down below if you actually experience this when you read. I'd like to know. Well, this is because when your mind wanders, you're not actually focused. This is a problem because you need good focus to be able to retain info. Luckily, I have a solution. There are ways you can sharpen your focus that will enable you to learn more in a shorter time. In fact, there are 3 of these I'm going to show you. So first up, we have the flow zone. When you start a task, there is a chance you'll enter a thing called flow state. You've probably experienced this before, where everything around you blurs as you're focused on the task. Well, here's the thing about flow. When you're in a good enough flow state, you can learn so much information that by the time you're done, you'll start sounding like a Harvard professor. But here's the problem. Your flow state currently sucks. If you can't zone in for a full hour, then you're not going to hit this level. So what do we do? Well, here's how to get into the best flow state for learning possible. To be in flow state, you need to be in the right conditions. For example, if I have brain fog, I can't go in flow state. It's just impossible. This means that in order to actually enter this mode, you need to have a clear mind. And you also need to know what your task is and why you're doing it. But the one thing that will put you above everyone else is to use your peak time correctly. So what is peak time? Well, every day we all have a certain time where we can focus the best. However, what most people will do is that during their peak hour, they will mess it up. You could be learning so much more when you're in flow state, but if you mess it up like everyone else, you won't get much out of it. Luckily though, I'm going to teach you how to get the most out of that peak hour. So at your peak time, you want to first remove all distractions, and then you want to maximize the conditions, right? Do things like meditate every morning, like I said. Make your why strong. Maximize focus stimuli like music. All of this will boost your flow state to the point where you'll learn much more than everyone else. Now, second is attention drills. There is a way you can increase your attention span to learn more. Because here's the thing, most people who can't learn have bad attention spans, which means that if you were to slightly increase your attention span, you're going to be much smarter than most people. To do this, I'm going to make you do what's called an attention drill. Basically, let's say you have a book, right? You've been putting it off for a while because whenever you read it, you get thoughts and it gets in the way. But what if we can use those thoughts to your advantage? That's right. What I want you to do is that when you start reading, when a thought pops up, redirect your mind back on the page. The more you do this, the better you get at paying attention. And funnily enough, this will enable you to retain more information. This is one of the most effective ways you can learn actually, because you're paying attention to the book, like all of your attention. Crazy, I know, right? You're actually using your mind. Wow. Anyway, and finally, third is conscious learning. This has actually enabled me to remember a lot of things. Basically, I want to ask you something. Yes, you the viewer. How much do you actually think about what you're learning, like in the moment? I'm willing to bet that you don't at all. This is important because you have to be thinking about what you're learning, or otherwise it won't stick in your mind. So what you're going to do is a thing called conscious learning. This is very similar to active recall, except instead of like doing the recall right afterwards, you're going to recall as you're learning. Yes, if you're reading, recall whenever you find something valuable. This in itself will make you learn 50 times more. That's how great this technique is. But we have one more thing to talk about, okay? If you don't implement this, you're going to miss out. Basically, on the 22nd of November last year, I uploaded this video. It was about how you can retain everything you read, right? And it was so good that it got 93,000 views. Video's right here, watch it if you please, okay? It'll improve your learning. And not only that, we also have a new membership club that you can subscribe to get videos early, okay? So if you want to be ahead of everyone, subscribe to that membership, okay? Now subscribe and keep never quitting.